This is the Emerald Dream Zone, the most recent addition to the Dragonflight expansion. It's currently filled by max level players who are taking part in events, farming reputation, and making their way through the giant zone centered around the World Tree and Pngtree. What many players don't know is that for this zone, it's been a very long way to get here. Starting from the first time players encountered quests and NPCs that spoke of the Emerald Dream almost 2 decades ago, through the discovery of a strange world hidden within the game files, to the time when players were finally able to step through the portal. This is the story of the Emerald Dream. When the original version of World of Warcraft released in 2004, some of the Night Elf players who made it through the zone of Pngtree came across an NPC called Talonkai who was located in the city of Dolanar. He offered the quest called the Emerald Dreamcatcher, which was the first mention of the Emerald Dream that players would encounter within the game, although it didn't explain anything about what the Emerald Dream actually was. And at the time, less than a week after the game's release, players were also, understandably, much more interested in where to look in order to find the quest item than they were in learning more about the Emerald Dream. As players progressed through the intro and low-level zones of Kalimdor, they would meet more NPCs who spoke of the Emerald Dream, as well as the book called The World Tree and the Emerald Dream, which was the first reference to the Emerald Dream as not only a state of dreaming, but an entirely separate dimension. One that was connected to the physical world of Azeroth through the World Tree called Nordosil, which is located in Hyjal, a zone that was inaccessible to the player base, although some persistent players did manage to find their way into the zone. Additionally, in the low-level dungeon called the Wailing Caverns in the Barren Zone, players had their first encounter with an NPC who were themselves in the Emerald Dream. Here, the druid named Naralax had ventured into the Emerald Dream, which had then turned into a nightmare. One that players needed to help him escape from by waking him up. While it wasn't known at the time, the nightmare that Naralax had would come to play a large role in the search for the Emerald Dream towards the later patches of Vanilla. A few months after the game's release, patch 1.3 launched. And with it came the Diamond Dungeons, which among other things dropped class-specific quest items. Here, druids could pick up a quest called the Emerald Dream, which sadly didn't offer any more information, but looking through old comments about the quest, which were originally posted on Thoughtbot, one of World of Warcraft's early databases, players had already formed some ideas of what the Emerald Dream was and where it could be found, with one comment referring to an area in Ashenvale called Bow Shadow, where green dragons were guarding a large portal. There were actually 4 of these portals, located in Ashenvale, Feralas, Hinterlands and Duskwood, with the first 3 of these being guarded by high-level elite dragons, some of whom had a variation of dream in their name. Initially, the portals, as well as the dragons guarding them, were a total mystery, but over time, players started piecing together the story of how the Emerald Dream might be accessed through one of these portals in the future. And when players discovered that the Emerald Dream did indeed exist within the game files, they started speculating that these portals could be used to enter the zone, which at this point consisted of 2 named areas, the Verdant Fields and the Emerald Forest, with the rest of the map being unnamed. In terms of size, the zone was very large, although most areas were only partially developed. This finding sparked additional interest in the Emerald Dream, and when patch 1.8 released, around a year after the launch of World of Warcraft, each of these 4 portals started spawning dragons of Nightmare who were world bosses that needed an entire raid of players to take down. Among other items, each of these dragons dropped a Nightmare-engulfed object, which could be returned to Romulus in Moonglade. And here, players learned that the Emerald Dream was being corrupted by the Nightmare, which had managed to break its way into the physical world of Azeroth. Around the same time, some players had seemingly found their way into the Emerald Dream through the portals, and there were even videos and screenshots showing players exploring the Emerald Dream. But as players tried to replicate this, they were unable to enter the portals just like they had been previously. Initially, those interested in the Emerald Dream were split between those believing that the footage wasn't captured on official Blizzard realms, and those believing the footage to be real, but that players had to complete some sort of action prior to being able to enter the portals. Much like the rumors surrounding the Slime Serpent Mount from the Shadowlands expansion. One of these rumors was that only those who had killed the dragons and completed the questline that the Nightmare object started were able to enter the Emerald Dream through the portals, which at the time weren't that many, seeing as the Nightmare dragons weren't easy and they only dropped a single quest item each. When the following patch 1.9 released, the portals that supposedly led to the Emerald Dream became part of the Scepter of the Shifting Sands questline. A very long questline, which many consider to be the best one ever created. Here, players had to gather fragments which dropped off of dragon guards near the portals, after which they were brought to the Moonglade zone, where a large battle between players and the corrupted green dragon Irenicus took place. While the questline added some more context to the struggle between the Emerald Dream and the nightmare that was corrupting it, it was finally concluded that for the time being, the portals were completely closed, no matter what players did. But this isn't to say that players gave up on the idea of the Emerald Dream being accessible, as there were other theories, one of which could be found in the mountains separating the zones of Ashenvale and Mount Hyjal. From the bottom of the Ashenvale zone, it was possible to get a glimpse of two small dots in the mountainside. And with the use of farsight abilities, players could see that these were large clouds, which were rumored to be connected to the Emerald Dream, maybe even leading there. The reason for this might have been their visual similarity to Sleeping Fog, or more commonly known as Dream Fog, an ability that all three of the Nightmare Dragons would cast during their encounters, as well as being located on the side of the inaccessible Mount Hyjal zone, where the world tree that linked Azeroth to the Emerald Dream could be found. When some players eventually succeeded in wall jumping all the way over to the clouds, they learned that they didn't do anything. And as the original vanilla version of the game came to an end, players still hadn't found a way into the Emerald Dream. Over the following decade, new questlines related to the Emerald Dream continued being added. One of these was the quest called Hope Within the Emerald Nightmare, which took place in a phased version of the Moonglade zone, and after more than a decade since World of Warcraft's release, players finally got the opportunity to enter the Emerald Dream. First in the form of a class hall for druids in the Legion expansion, and most recently in the form of an entire playable zone with the same name, the Emerald Dream, in the Dragonflight expansion. By now, the Emerald Dream had long been established as an ever-changing spirit world, representing what Azeroth would have looked like had it not been spoiled by intelligent civilization. Even after the addition of a playable Emerald Dream zone, the initial unreleased version is still present in the game files in its original form, although some elements have been updated since it was first data mined. And just like the scenery of the zone, the plans for the original Emerald Dream zone that started all the way back in the alpha stages saw a lot of changes as the game around it evolved. It was initially intended to be an area specific for druid characters, as explained by Jeff Kaplan a year prior to WoW's launch. And when the game released, there were actually a few remnants of this idea that made it into the original game, where some NPCs only spoke of the Emerald Dream when talking to druid characters. And in the Legion expansion, druids were the only ones to get access to the Emerald Dreamway, although a few warlocks and hunters did actually make it into the zone. Later on the same day, Jeff Kaplan explained that the zone was going to be focused around endgame content, which in World of Warcraft usually means raid content. These two statements were made on the same day, one in the morning and one in the evening, which suggested that the developers still weren't completely set on which direction to take for the zone. But when the game finally released, the Emerald Dream was classified as a 40-man raid instance. So it's likely that the developers decided on releasing the Emerald Dream as a raid zone at some point during vanilla, which would make sense given the many in-game references as well as the dream portals that were guarded by high-level elites, just like the entrances to other raids at the time. After the game's first expansion, the Burning Crusade, was announced, Blizzard stated that while there were no plans yet, there was a possibility that a future expansion could be centered around the Emerald Dream. Over the following years, Blizzard did consider this option, but concluded that due to the beautiful but also fairly repetitive scenery, making an entire expansion around the Emerald Dream wouldn't be ideal. And it would do better as either a raid or a subzone, which is what the player base finally got in patch 10.2 of the Dragonflight expansion, just short of 20 years since the first plans of the Emerald Dream were made public.